tonight to have with us in the audience the playwright Nick Pappas. If anybody does, can we go ahead and have house up to half? If anybody does need to leave, this would be a great time to do that. But Nick is going to honor us with a very short, maybe 15-minute talk back. If you've got some questions of him or the cast, so we'll wait till we get a little. You guys want to see? Does anybody want to see? I met Nick 2.5 years ago. Before I started working here, I met him at Thespian Festival. We, I don't know, it was like breakfast or lunch with that crazy comic. And we laughed and
right.
Yeah, it was so much fun.
Yeah.
But then we started talking about his show, and I got a copy and decided, it had to be done at some point. After Parkland happened, I went to Mr. Mead and I said, the time is right. These kids aren't being quiet. Why would we be quiet? And the administration agreed with us. Nick is a local playwright. His play is produced through Play Scripts Incorporated. And we were so fortunate to have him come to a dress rehearsal and give notes, too. I mean, that's just, how special is that?
How awesome. Script Schmidt, these actors are crazy good, right? Wow.
So, questions? Yeah. Nick, it's all yours, buddy.
Oh, I'm taking it, okay, yeah.
Okay, serious question. So how is, for Sung Bleaching, how is rape porn better than what Roger did? Like, you would watch
Yeah. So one more time, I'm so sorry.
How is he not as a, I know he wasn't a rapist, but how is he not on equal level as Roger?
It was really interesting. I think that part of that goes into the development of the play, right?
Can we hear the question?
Oh yeah, so the question was, how is he not as bad as him, right? Like that's the thrust of the question.
So how is his sexual preference different from
The
fact that
because he didn't enact on it? Is that what?
Yeah, so I think, again, this comes into part of the structure of the play and the writing process of the play. This was a really hard play to write, first of all, because as I was working on it, it felt like at least once every couple of weeks, something else would happen and I would have to figure out how to update the play and how to continue working on the play, which is, of course, awful, right? Like, that was terrible. And before the first major reading of the play, I think it was maybe less than 2 weeks beforehand, the shooting in Isla Vista happened, which was Elliot Roger. And that really struck a chord because even though there was manifestos written and things written, that was the first real, we had YouTube and video at that point. And I just found, as unsettling as all of these people are, there's something really unsettling about that clip of Elliot Roger talking. I also am personally a super hardcore feminist. I think that the rights of women are very, very important. And there were certain things that Roger said that really sort of struck a chord for me. And one of the things that I started thinking about was how interesting would it be if all of these people, because that's what they are essentially, right? Like at the end of the day, all the shooters are still people, they're still human. One of the things that just struck me was, what was the class system like for them? And part of what went into that idea of class system, I had already had this idea in place that Mama was the character who was the person who was sort of like their deity, so to speak. And he seemed the most likely to work against their deity, so in that idea of class system, they would then attack that person. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but part of that was just development and timing. Yeah.
Two quick questions. Number one, do you have unfortunately, any plans to update it now because of Parkland?
Yeah, that is tough. That is a tough question. The question was, is there any plans to update it now after Parkland? And quite honestly, after the shooting in Texas, Pulse nightclub happened after this. Sorry, what?
Maryland just happened.
Yeah, Maryland just happened. And not all of these incidents are at school, but they are part of the collective consciousness, I think, about any kind of mass spree shooting. And I struggle. I really struggle with the idea of, do I update it? And I think what really breaks my heart about just the idea of that is, I think if I did, I would never stop updating. I think every 6 months to a year, I would have to look at the facts, the numbers, the figures, and do that. And quite honestly, writing this play almost broke me as a human. To read autopsy reports of what a bullet does to a kindergartner's body is devastating in so many ways, and I just don't know if I could even physically and emotionally handle jumping back into this play, which is awful because it's 3 years old and it's almost embarrassingly out of date.
Beautiful.
Thank you, but like that's tough. Like that feeling is tough. So.
And the second question, can you just very briefly explain the character of Mama?
So the second question was briefly explain the character of Mama. Mama, Brenda Spencer, is considered like the first modern day school shooter. She was the first person who was a student. Her thing was she sat across the street from her school, from actually an elementary school, and was shooting people in Cleveland as they were going into classes. This was, I can't remember the exact date, it was early 80s. Late 70s. I try to push as much of the information out of my head as possible.
So she predated.
She predated everybody but Whitman.
Yeah.
But Whitman was slightly different,
1960.
and there was a huge split between Whitman and her. The crazy part about the research about this play too, and I know this wasn't a question, but like this attaches to that. Shootings on school campuses have happened. They coincide with the founding of America. The earliest ones date back to the mid 1700s. A lot of the time, it was jilted man coming in and killing the school marm in front of the students and then killing himself. But this is a thing that we don't really talk about. But the idea of violence and murder on school campuses is something that has been woven into the fabric of America from predating the Constitution. It's scary, and it doesn't happen other places the same way it happens here, dating back to that time. So, yes, you had a question?
Yeah, two. One not so important, the other kind of. The 17 shots. Why that number?
In which?
Because you said
Football
the
football player?
last bullet killed him. And it seems like overkill to me.
I don't know. Actually, that's a question that I think 17. I couldn't actually honestly answer. Like,
I think
why
the last,
17?
The part that got me was that the last bullet got him. That was just a little bit like. I mean, I figured like the first 16.
Yeah.
Had done it.
Yeah, just
First
didn't.
7, really.
Big guy. First, yeah.
And then also, why was Adam Lanza moved out of the corner, I guess, and kind of accepted, and went kind of, from my view, he's below Rogers?
Well, I think that kind of answers. I kind of answer that question with him. It's
Just a
it's
time thing?
it's not only time, but I think it's also part of what that manifesto was, right? Like,
Oh, okay,
just for them.
Okay.
The attitude.
yeah. The question up in the back.
Curious because, I mean, with the TED Talk and all, I thought that was very interesting, you know, that you added that. But I mean, is there, what is your overall sense of why still that you know, I mean, we still don't really know, right?
Yeah.
Did you look at assassins of presidents, for instance, their mentality? You know, President Kennedy, for instance, Sir Mansur, people like that. Did you study those kinds of people too, or there's similarities, or?
So the question was, what is my overall sense of why? And did I study assassins of presidents, things like that?
They want notoriety, they want, you
Well-
know, it's somewhat.
Yeah, you know, I did not study assassins, partially because I felt like there's something political tied in, obviously, with every single assassination or assassination attempt. Quite honestly, when I started writing, I'm laughing because it's ridiculous. I started writing this play, and the structure of this play at one point was going to be very, very, very different. It was going to be a 2-act play. The first act was simply going to be a bunch of students in a room as they heard the shooter coming closer. And then the second act of the play was going to be a therapy session with all the school shooters, and they were going to be talking about their feelings and talking out their ideas. And I thought, very stupidly, that I would figure out, be like, oh yeah, no, I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to solve this problem, which is like saying, I don't know, I'm going to walk to the moon, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to cure cancer by writing about it. And it was only after a lot of drafts where I realized that the more I tried to explain things, the more questions there were. I really did a lot of research on all of the killers when they're talking about why they did it. That was actually all the reasons that was presented by the news media to the public. Very little of that was actually the killer's own words, except for actually Roger's speech is basically a very condensed version of his manifesto video. So yeah, I wanted to figure it out, and there was nothing, and I don't know. I wish I was smart enough. I don't know if anyone's smart enough. Do I have an internal sense of why?
Yeah, just like a
Oof, I feel like I'm going on dangerous ground. Well, I will say this. I will say part of my internal sense is, and in some ways, the character of Sean.
Yeah, right here.
Where are you?
That's what I think too.
There we are. Sean is sort of.
No simple answer.
Yeah, no simple answer, but he's sort of my surrogate, and one of the things that I kept bumping up against is everyone wanted to push all of the shooters away and keep them as far and say they're different, they're different, they're different. And I think one of the questions, and this is a really hard thing to even say because of course we want to distance ourselves from people who do awful things. We don't want to see ourselves in them, we don't want to see anyone we know in them for a multitude of reasons. But one of the things that I kept bumping up against was, I'm curious if someone just took a second to try to understand. What could we do? And I think this works in all realms of life, right? Like, if we can just take a second to try to understand what someone else is saying to us, what is on the other side, those who are different than us, I think that creates love and understanding and compassion and reaching across the aisle, so to speak, and it actually heals. And I think that's partially what I'm hoping for, is that we stop saying they're different and we start asking, why are they like us? And if we ask that question, maybe we can start identifying what it is that is like us and where they differ, and then how we can bridge that gap to pull close rather than push away. Is that track?
How many of these shooters were picked by this school or where they were at before shooting to diagnose them as they have an issue?
How many were?
Any of the school shooters who were in the same school were picked by the school that they having problems to?
Yeah.
Cho had a teacher quit, threatened to quit if he's not in his university.
Yeah.
If she stated if he wasn't taken out of her class, she would quit.
He was a creative writing teacher, right?
Yeah, his creative writing teacher. And then his father and his roommate turned him in just, a month before the shooting?
Beforehand, yeah.
And turned him into the school and said, you've got to get him some help. I mean,
Did they do that?
they had a meeting with him, or they put him in 2 or 3 days. I think they put him in lockdown because he said he was thinking of killing himself, so he got the 3 days detention that one gets. But it was not uncommon with all of them to have somebody say, hey, wait a minute, there's a problem here.
And I think that's one of the things that we have to all start looking at is like the infrastructure that we have to help people with mental illness. Like how do we help people who are in need of help, right? It's a really interesting thing, and I think this connects again to the suicide thing. I mean, everyone, I'm assuming a lot of people here on Facebook or something like that, or Twitter, after Anthony Bourdain died, my entire Twitter feed was filled, and my entire Facebook feed was filled with people saying like, hey, if you have troubles, come talk to me. I'll have coffee on the stove and I'll be up all night waiting and ready to talk to you. And there's something beautiful about that, and I do not want to diminish like the importance of that. But I think what's really important to consider the other side is people don't have the power to reach out. When you feel powerless and you feel hopeless, reaching out, even though you know there might be people who say they love you, they don't really love you. I mean, that's the thought process, right? So I think it's partially incumbent upon us to then reach your hand out and say like, hey, I am here, come talk to me, and make it specific and personal. But again, if we don't have the infrastructure to actually help people once other people reach out, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know, there's no helping beyond that.
And does it follow that?
Stacy, and we'll come back around, I promise.
Hi.
Yeah.
When you were developing the play, were you intending for the actors to be children? And if you weren't, does this change your mindset that it was presented by children?
It was actually written. The play was something that had been germinating in my mind for a very long time. Like the original person who paid me the commission to write the piece was Dramatics Magazine, which is part of the International Thespian Festival,
That's us, yeah.
which is where we met, and it's a high school theater festival. So, it was always meant to be performed by teens to early 20s, so basically high school, college. And I don't know if I would change much, other than perhaps I would take away a little bit more of the language, and I know that you took away some of the languages a little bit more. But at the same time, I don't know if I would actually do that because people talk like that. People say those words. People use the FA blah 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 word that I think is hurtful, and they say it in such a way that's meant to just, I think it actually is meant to sting. But what that does to somebody psychologically, if they, I don't know if I would change anything.
So first of all, I'd like to again commend you on an amazing play.
Oh,
that was really
thank you.
And then also, you mentioned how writing the piece, of course, was emotionally draining.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, first of all, how you dealt with that personally when it took up so much of your emotional time and energy. And then also, you also mentioned how every couple of weeks, there'd be something else in this realm. So how long from start to finish did it take you to finish this whole thing?
Yeah, two great questions. So the first question was, how did I deal with the emotional drain? Quite honestly, I was just a real asshole. Just grumpy and depressed. My family and my best friend are here. They can attest. My girlfriend, she can also attest that I was just not a pleasant person to be around. And I remember one time she actually said to me, you either need to finish this play or we're breaking up because I can't deal with you anymore. And I was like, I feel the same! I can't deal with me anymore. And how long, that's a hard, partially that's a hard question because I think I was thinking about this play, let's go with it. I was thinking about this play probably a full year before I even put pen to paper. And then the first draft probably took me about a month. I probably did a month or two of research. And second, third, and fourth drafts working through is probably another month and a half or so. And then I did some editing for the 2 subsequent publications afterwards. So all in all, from the time I started research to the time I finished, 5 to 6 months. But I was thinking about it probably a year before that.
Cindy's with our.
At the dress rehearsal that you went to with the students, were there any words that you imparted with them? Because it clearly affected you as an adult with the topic, and it stuck with you for a long time, in putting on this show and then how to kind of take it in but then let it go afterwards? Like, what did you guys do for the kids to
Well,
help
I
them
just
with the
basically said,
material?
don't make me look bad. No, just kidding. It's not what I said.
I have to tell you, that's my training. I train very physical theater, rather than, you know, of course we have to think, they all had to do their research, right? And that's heavy enough. But I really believe in taking on the body, and then the psychokinetic acting will happen. You take on the body, you research the text, you know what you're saying, and the brain will follow right along. It comes with you. You don't have to think, well, let's see, when was the last time I thought about being a shooter and how am I going to portray that? We don't go there. We don't go there at all. We did group hugs. Group hugs were good. Group hugs were good. And we talk about that. We talk about, are you okay? Are you going to let it, you know, and I got to tell you, I so much praise for Max.
Yes.
And every time I would go, Max, you okay? You okay? He's like, yeah, I'm fine. He goes, I don't hang on to it. It's fine. And you can tell he's not hanging on to it. You know, last night his mom, last night and Kurt called, he's waving at his mom, and I'm like, that's borderline creepy. I think we have probably time for one more question. One more question.
Kat, I want to tell you that James, Max, here brought me to tears. So good. I was crying. I know, I just wanted to tag on to that.
So we have time for one more question. Gabriella's had her hand up.
I spend so many nights as writing, just like staying up and not being able to stop. Is there a time where you're just like what do you do to be like, okay, this is it, like I have to like just sit down and like take away from this? Because like there are times where I'm just like, it's 4 o'clock and I'm like, I have school in 3 hours, like what am I gonna do to be able to just like sit down and relax? Like, is there anything that like detaches you from that?
Yeah, so the question is, so it's not specifically how do I detach from a certain project, it's how do I step away from writing in general.
In general.
Oh man, I wish I had that. Usually you have to like force me to write.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm like, what can I do other than writing? Oh, I haven't checked Twitter in the last 18 seconds. Maybe there's something new. There always is. That's the good part. That's the really good part. No, I think part of that is setting up a routine, treating it and understanding that it's like a job. I have times that I write every single day. This is what I do. And it can be very difficult towards the end of the day, knowing that my time is up and that I do have to go out and, I don't know, live life perhaps. A lot of the times I just try to make as many notes as possible. And then I think the other thing on top of that too is, I'm sure it's really difficult with school and you're getting late into the night and you need to get up in the next morning. But also, and I think this is the same thing for actors, I think this is the same thing for anyone who's artistic and loves what they do. Sometimes you're better off not going to that party on a Friday night or hanging out with your friends and working on your craft. So I think part of that is giving yourself permission to do that. You don't want to completely disengage and hide yourself from the world. You still have to engage. But there are times where you can make that decision, wherever you're at. Yeah, I don't know I hope that answered the question.
Perfect, thank you.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, this is so cool.
Oh, we need a picture.